beneath the harsh beauty of Death Valley lie stories that have never been fully told. Families who vanished without a trace, underground cities whispered of but never proven, crimes etched into the nation's memory, and treasures forever lost beneath the sands of time. In today's video, we will lift the veil shrouding Death Valley, a land that has swallowed not just people, but the very answers the world has long been yearning to find. So, fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. The mystery of the underground city of Shaav. Amidst the blistering heat of Death Valley, where endless stretches of burning sand and searing rock bake under a merciless sun, an ancient legend has been whispered through generations by the native southern Paiute people. They tell of a magnificent underground city called Shaav, governed by ancient spirits and hidden from mortal eyes through a labyrinth of passageways, accessible only to those deemed worthy. According to oral tradition, a Paiute chieftain, consumed by grief over the death of his beloved wife, resolved to seek her soul in the afterlife. Guided by ghostly warrior spirits, he ventured into the intricate network of subterranean tunnels, passing terrifying creatures and unseen traps until he eventually reached the borders of the Shaav kingdom. There, he met the daughter of Shaav, who promised to reunite him with his wife on one condition: he must not, under any circumstance, look back during his return. But he failed. A single glance, born from a moment of weakness, caused his wife's spirit to vanish forever into the void. Centuries later, the legend continued to live on in the hearts of the desert's children. But then, in the 1920s, a strange event occurred, one that shifted the story from mere myth to potential reality. A miner named White, while exploring an abandoned shaft deep within Death Valley, accidentally fell through decaying rock and into a space unlike anything he had ever known. According to his later account, he found himself standing inside an enormous tunnel where the walls emitted a faint golden glow, seemingly without need for any natural source of light. All around him, he saw human mummies clad in garments made of animal hide, standing motionless like silent sentinels. Terrified by the scene before him, White groped his way back to the surface through the tunnel from which he had fallen. Yet, when he attempted to find his way back, he could never locate the entrance again. In 1947, the mystery resurfaced, this time through the testimony of Howard E. Hill. According to Hill, two of his friends, F. Bruce Russell and Daniel Bovey, both retired physicians with a passion for exploration, had stumbled upon another tunnel system near Wingate Pass, the very location White had once spoken of. What they reported only deepened the enigma: walls of stone engraved with strange symbols, mummies standing 9 feet tall, and even the fossils of prehistoric creatures perfectly preserved beneath the earth. They claimed the complex included galleries filled with gold, silver, and artifacts unlike anything ever recorded by archaeologists. Yet when Russell and Bovey's stories were made public, they failed to produce any physical evidence to corroborate their claims. And before the scientific community could gather more information, both men mysteriously disappeared while returning to Death Valley to seek further proof. Skeptics were quick to dismiss the tale, arguing that elements such as giant human mummies and a golden city beneath the desert were nothing more than fantasy. But despite all doubts, one thing remains undeniable: the strange consistencies between the accounts of White, Russell, and Bovey, and the ancient legends passed down by the southern Paiute. Does an underground city truly lie hidden beneath the burning sands of Death Valley? Until irrefutable evidence comes to light, the mystery of Shaav will remain buried, locked away within the heart of Death Valley itself. Gold lost among the desert, the story of Breyfogle's lost mine. Tales of lost gold mines have long been woven into the very breath of history in the American West. Among the hundreds of such stories, the legend of Breyfogle's lost mine still stands apart. The story begins in the late 1840s, when the California gold rush swept through the nation like a storm, stripping away reason and driving hundreds of thousands of people westward toward the promised land. Caught in the fevered tide were two brothers, Charles and Joshua Breyfogle, who ventured forth carrying the simple but intoxicating belief that a single strike of a pick in the right place could buy them a lifetime of fortune. Unlike most gold seekers who found only disappointment, the Breyfogle brothers actually achieved success. In December 1850, Charles Breyfogle returned to New York carrying $20,000 worth of gold, an enormous fortune for the time. But the more he had, the more he hungered for. Within a few short years, Charles once again found himself lured by the call of untamed lands, and in 1862, he embarked on a new quest, this time in search of silver in Nevada. While preparing for his new adventure, Charles Breyfogle happened upon a group of men. Some sources claim they were silver prospectors, while others suggest they were Southern sympathizers seeking to cross Nevada and join Confederate forces in the ongoing Civil War. Whatever their true purpose, Charles joined their party as they journeyed into the uncharted wilds. But fate soon intervened. One night, while Breyfogle slept some distance from the main camp, the rest of the group was attacked and killed by a Native American tribe. When the sun rose, Charles awoke to find himself the sole survivor. In the days that followed, he wandered the desert like a living ghost, scorched by the relentless sun and stalked every hour by thirst and hunger. It was during one of these desperate hours that Charles Breyfogle stumbled upon something he would never forget for the rest of his life. There before him rose a massive quartz vein, glittering with raw streaks of gold, jutting up from the earth like some untouched wonder. A golden oasis in a desert of death. He tried desperately to mark the discovery in his mind, but from that moment onward, he would never find his way back to it. Before he could even attempt a return, Charles was captured by a Native American tribe and held prisoner for several months. Eventually, he managed to escape and made his way to Austin, Nevada. For the rest of his life, Charles Breyfogle never abandoned the dream of finding the gold vein that had once saved him. Again and again, he organized expeditions, crossing treacherous mountain ranges and deadly valleys, but each time, he returned empty-handed. The precise location of the vein was never recorded. Some accounts suggest it lies somewhere near Death Valley, the hottest place in North America. Others point toward the cold, lonely Shoshone Mountains in central Nevada. Wherever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Charles Breyfogle never fulfilled his golden dream. Today, the story of Breyfogle's lost mine still circulates among treasure hunters and fortune seekers. But Death Valley is not a land that gives up its gifts easily. It demands sacrifice, perseverance, and sometimes even the lives of those bold enough to challenge it. Shadows at Barker Ranch, when crime hid itself within Death Valley. Isolated among the barren rocks and thorny shrubs of Death Valley, Barker Ranch stands as a place seemingly forgotten by time. Yet its desolate appearance conceals a far more chilling truth, one of the darkest chapters in the history of American crime. In 1969, Barker Ranch became the final refuge for Charles Manson and his cult of devoted followers. Individuals whose names would forever be seared into America's consciousness through a series of savage acts, culminating in the brutal murder of actress Sharon Tate and her friends that August. On the night of August 8th and into the early morning hours of August 9th, under Manson's direction, his followers broke into a luxurious hilltop home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, where Sharon Tate and 4 others were slaughtered in a frenzy of bloodshed. The victim's blood was even used to scrawl haunting messages across the walls, as a deranged challenge to the outside world. Only a day later, the killers struck again, this time targeting Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, an ordinary couple with no connection to Sharon Tate, murdering them in their own home with a savagery that defies description. As the nation recoiled in horror, Manson and his followers quietly retreated into the vast desert, and Barker Ranch became their hiding place. In September of 1969, an unexpected incident broke the quiet of Death Valley National Monument. A bulldozer, used for road repairs around a dry lake bed, suddenly burst into flames. Dick Powell, a young park ranger, was the first to arrive on the scene and immediately recognized that this was no accident. Signs of deliberate sabotage were evident on the ruined machine. The investigation soon widened, and disturbing signs began to emerge. Abandoned campsites scattered across the desert, stolen and wrecked off-road vehicles, and reports from tourists about strange bands of hippies recklessly racing through the desert at night. Piece by piece, the evidence pointed to one place, Barker Ranch, a place long forgotten, now thrust into the center of suspicion. Locals began whispering about a ragged man seen preaching bizarre sermons about the apocalypse and transcendence, while his followers, often under the influence of drugs or wandering naked through the desert, fed the growing unease. On October 10, 1969, park rangers, sheriff's deputies, and California Highway Patrol officers coordinated a daring raid on Barker Ranch. In the aftermath, Charles Manson was finally taken into custody. In the following weeks, as Manson's sprawling network of crimes came into sharper focus, Barker Ranch became a focal point for investigators. Authorities suspected that it could be a burial site for unknown victims. Although no confessions were made and the initial excavations found no conclusive evidence, suspicion continued to linger for decades. In 2008, modern geophysical survey techniques were applied at Barker Ranch, revealing soil anomalies, areas where the ground had been disturbed in ways consistent with clandestine burials. Yet despite further excavations, no definitive evidence was uncovered. And so, Barker Ranch, with its crumbling walls and blood-stained past, continues to stir uneasy questions. How many secrets still lie buried beneath the sands? And how many souls were denied the justice they deserved? Lieutenant Paul Whipkey, the soldier who vanished into the shadows of Death Valley. On August 17, 1958, in a remote corner far from any sign of civilization, a park ranger stumbled upon an abandoned car. It sat alone in the heart of Death Valley, 15 miles from the nearest road, and more than 500 miles by land from the military base where its owner had once been stationed. The keys were still in the ignition, and the doors were locked tight, as if the driver had merely stepped out for a moment. The car belonged to Lieutenant Paul Whipkey, a young officer who had been serving at Fort Ord along the California coastline. 1 month earlier, on July 10th, Whipkey had told his comrades that he was stepping out to get a drink. From that moment on, he vanished from the world, leaving behind a chain of questions that, more than half a century later, remain unanswered. At first, the military simply concluded that Whipkey had deserted, but to the Whipkey family, particularly his brother Chris Whipkey, the story was never so simple. Chris recalled that just one day after Paul's disappearance, the Army had hurriedly cleared out all of his belongings from the barracks, an unusually hasty move for a case of desertion that had barely been registered. And when Paul's car was eventually found in Death Valley, the family received only fragmented information, much of it hidden under the veil of classified status. What should have been a simple missing persons case had now become a genuine mystery. What later came to light painted an even stranger picture. After leaving Fort Ord, Paul Whipkey had checked into a motel in Mojave, a small desert town hundreds of miles from his base. The next day, he purchased 11 gallons of gasoline and then disappeared without a trace. At just 25 years old, Paul was already wearing dentures, an unusual health condition for a young, otherwise fit man. Strange moles had begun appearing on his body, along with an unexplained physical decline. Although the military never officially acknowledged it, his family strongly suspected that Paul had been exposed to radiation during his service. Over time, the theory that intelligence agencies such as the CIA were involved gained traction. Some speculated that Paul Whipkey had been recruited into top-secret programs, perhaps related to radiation experiments or clandestine Cold War operations. Others, more pessimistic, suggested he had been eliminated, whether by enemies or by his own side, to protect dangerous secrets. Under mounting pressure from his family and the public, the United States Army eventually convened an internal hearing in 1982. In that proceeding, they formally cleared Whipkey of desertion, declaring instead that he had died in the line of duty, though no body was ever recovered. To this day, the story of Paul Whipkey remains unresolved. Did he lose his life on a covert mission in some distant land? Was he the victim of inhumane experiments during the Cold War? Or perhaps, under the blistering heat of Death Valley, he simply collapsed somewhere, lost forever to the sands. Tragedy in the desert, the German family that vanished in Death Valley. In summer, Death Valley becomes a vast, searing furnace stretching endlessly under the burning sky. Temperatures easily climb past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, turning any careless journey into a one-way passage with no return. Yet despite the dangers, on July 8th, a small family led by Hyas Viber landed in Los Angeles, brimming with excitement for an adventure that would take them deep into Death Valley. On July 22nd, they entered the valley. On their first night, they camped at Hanapa Canyon. The next day, driven by the spirit of exploration, they pushed even deeper into the heart of this unforgiving land. And from that moment onward, they vanished. The last trace the world would ever find of them was Cornelia Meer's signature in the guest book of an abandoned mine. When Hyas Weber realized that his family had disappeared, they had already been trapped in Death Valley for 5 agonizing days. In a place where each passing hour is a battle for survival, 5 days meant the brink of despair. Yet during all that time, no distress signal was ever sent. No passing traveler stumbled upon them. And when the search began, all hope of rescue seemed to have already evaporated. It wasn't until October 21st, nearly 3 months after their disappearance, that a helicopter from the Park Service finally spotted their green minivan, abandoned in Anvil Spring Canyon, a place so isolated that even compasses could lose their way. The vehicle bore the scars of a brutal journey. Tires shredded by razor-sharp rocks, the body scratched and battered by savage sandstorms. Beside the van, rescuers found a tent, a sleeping bag, and a car jack, but no sign of the people who had driven it there. A massive search operation was quickly launched. More than 200 rescuers, armed with the best skills and equipment, scoured every crevice, every rocky slope, every desolate valley. But aside from an empty beer bottle found near the scene, they uncovered nothing. On October 26th, the official search was called off, leaving the German family as if they had simply dissolved into the desert. For more than a decade, the name the Death Valley Germans became a symbol of an enduring mystery. Theories emerged, most suggesting that after their vehicle became disabled in the treacherous terrain, the group was forced to abandon it and set out on foot in search of help. But under the merciless sun and with water supplies dwindling, they lost their way and perished in the heart of the desert. It wasn't until 2009, thanks to the perseverance and compassion of 2 amateur rescuers, Les Walker and Tom Mahood, that a part of the mystery was finally unveiled. Working from the theory that the family had attempted to reach the China Lake Naval Base in search of assistance, they chose to explore an area that had previously been overlooked. On November 17, 2009, after days of battling brutal terrain and unforgiving heat, they found the remains of Edbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meer, lying miles south of the abandoned minivan. It was a discovery that left the entire rescue community, and those who had followed the story for 13 long years, in stunned silence. But even then, it revealed only half the truth. The 2 children, Georg and Max, remain lost to this day, their final fate swallowed forever by the desert. There are mysteries that time itself seems powerless to erase. Stories of disappearances, lost treasures, and unseen shadows buried deep within Death Valley still await the one who might uncover their final truths. If what you've heard today made you pause, even for a moment, to wonder what truly lies hidden beneath that endless sea of sand, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can continue to join us on future journeys into untold mysteries. Until then, we'll see you in the next story.